The city felt wired, like a live wire humming beneath the marble. TV trucks idled along Constitution Avenue, their masts stabbing the wet evening air. Inside the Capitol Visitor Center, ushers whispered, camera lenses glinted, and a curated audience waited for a soft landing speech the press had already labeled a healing moment. Jill Biden stepped to the lectern with measured grace, ivory suit, steady smile, the practiced composure of someone who understands the power of tone. Our country, she began, needs mercy more than victory, conversation more than combat. The words floated, polished, almost musical. Heads nodded. Phones rose. The hashtag wrote itself. From 3 rows back, Senator John Kennedy watched without blinking. Elbows on the armrests, papers folded once and squared, he looked less like a guest and more like the counterargument waiting to happen. His mind ticked through a ledger the speech wouldn't touch, grocery prices that made parents do math in the cereal aisle, police departments stretched to threadbare, border towns carrying a weight they didn't vote for. He respected civility, he distrusted sedation. Leadership, in his book, wasn't mood lighting, it was switch flipping. Make it safer, cheaper, saner. Period. Jill's cadence rose. We heal when we listen, we grow when we forgive. The audience broke into gentle applause, warm and well-mannered. Kennedy half-smiled the way a fisherman does when the cork dips but doesn't disappear. He glanced toward the back cameras, then toward the press row, and finally at the clock glowing amber on the wall. Timing, like policy, either works or it doesn't. She pivoted to a story about a teacher in Scranton buying supplies out of pocket. It landed. But as the applause swelled again, Kennedy stood, unhurried, polite, and the room's oxygen shifted. He didn't take the lectern, he didn't need to. His drawl carried like gravel across water. "Ma'am," he said, hands open, voice calm as a courthouse porch, "America does need kindness. But she also needs electricity that stays on, streets where kids can ride a bike after supper, and a border that doesn't look like a suggestion." A ripple moved through the rows, surprise, curiosity, a flicker of disapproval, and then a hush, the expensive kind. Jill's smile tightened by a millimeter, the cameras loved it. Kennedy continued, still courteous. "Words can soothe, Dr. Biden. But a country can't eat them." Gasps, a quick cough of laughter, a clipped shoo from the aisle. The moderator shifted in his seat, deciding whether to intervene and deciding, for now, not to. Jill placed both hands on the lectern, steady as a metronome. "Senator," she said evenly, "compassion isn't the opposite of strength." Kennedy nodded once, as if invited. "No, ma'am. But it's not a substitute for it, either." And with that, the evening stopped being a program, and became a contest. The silence that followed was not ordinary. It was the kind that stretches a heartbeat into a full minute. A few in the audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply hold their breath. The stage lights, designed to flatter, now seemed too bright, catching the faintest twitch of tension in Jill Biden's jaw. She smoothed her notes, but her eyes stayed fixed on Kennedy, as though willing him back into his chair. But Kennedy wasn't moving. His presence, planted and deliberate, made clear this was no interruption, it was an intervention. "Senator," Jill said again, this time her voice carrying more steel. "The role of a First Lady is not to legislate policy but to uplift the spirit of the nation. That's what I'm doing here tonight." Applause broke out from her allies in the front rows, eager to reset the rhythm. But Kennedy didn't blink. He raised his hand, palm outward, not to silence her but to signal respect before he spoke again. "Ma'am, with all due regard, uplifting spirit doesn't put supper on the table. It doesn't lower crime, and it doesn't pay the gas bill. The American people are already inspired. They're just tired of being broke." The jab landed harder than a punch. The moderator fumbled with his papers, muttering about keeping decorum, but the cameras had already locked on. Jill, determined not to let him seize the narrative, leaned forward. "Do you believe anger will fix those problems, Senator? Do you think belittling compassion brings Americans together?" Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly, his drawl sharpening like a file across metal. No, ma'am. I think results bring Americans together. A working family in Louisiana doesn't care about the poetry of unity if they can't afford eggs. And forgive me, but speeches about healing sound a lot like telling them to smile through the pain. Gasps, murmurs, even a sharp, "That's unfair," from the balcony. But a pocket of applause, raw, unscripted, erupted from the back rows, ordinary citizens who hadn't been invited to nod politely but had come to be heard. Kennedy gestured toward them. "That's not me talking. That's them." The cameras caught Jill's expression, unflinching, yes, but no longer serene. This was no longer a ceremony. It had become a duel of philosophies, played out in real time before millions. Kennedy finally eased back into his chair, not in retreat but in challenge, as if to say, "Your move." Jill adjusted the microphone, her voice calm but edged now with urgency. "Leadership, Senator, is not just about fixing what's broken. It's about reminding people why it's worth fixing at all." The crowd hummed with divided energy, half uplifted, half unconvinced. And somewhere between those halves, the stage had become a battlefield. The air in the hall had shifted. What had begun as a ceremonial platform for unity had now morphed into something sharper, more combustible. Journalists in the front rows leaned forward, pens scratching frantically, while the television crews adjusted their lenses to catch every flicker of emotion. Jill Biden, still poised, exhaled slowly before responding. She knew the power of optics. If she appeared rattled, Kennedy would have already won the night. But if she projected calm resilience, the narrative could swing back. "Senator," she began, her voice softened to a near whisper, forcing the room to lean in. "Do you think dismissing empathy makes you stronger? Families don't just need checks in the mail, they need hope, too. Without it, there's nothing to fight for." Her words landed not as a counterpunch but as a plea. For a moment, even some of Kennedy's supporters fell quiet, caught between admiration for his bluntness and recognition of her conviction. Kennedy tilted his head, that familiar wry smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am, I respect your heart. But hope without solutions is just a Hallmark card. You can't feed your children with optimism. And you can't build trust in government by offering platitudes while the border is leaking, the economy is sagging, and crime is climbing." The drawl lingered, cutting like gravel dragged across glass. He wasn't speaking in abstracts, he was drawing a map of frustration etched into kitchen tables and late-night bills across the nation. A ripple ran through the crowd. One half stirred with applause, the other bristled with indignation. Jill tightened her grip on the lectern, the paper beneath her fingers trembling slightly. She raised her chin. "You think I don't see those struggles? I live in this country too. But leadership is about uniting, not dividing. If all we do is trade blows, who carries the burden? The people. Always the people." The tension was thick enough to taste. Kennedy leaned forward, resting one elbow on his chair's arm, eyes locked on her like a marksman sighting in. "That's exactly my point, ma'am. The people are carrying the burden. And they're tired of it. What they want isn't another speech about togetherness, they want someone to take the weight off their backs." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "That starts with honesty, not poetry." The crowd broke, no longer in polite halves but in full-throated camps. Shouts of "That's right," clashed with cries of "Shame." The moderator's gavel tapped uselessly against the table. For the first time, the First Lady and the Senator weren't just debating, they were embodying two Americas colliding, live and unfiltered, in front of the world. The room was now a live wire, every eye darting between Jill Biden and Senator Kennedy as if waiting for one of them to finally break. The moderator, beads of sweat glistening under the stage lights, attempted once again to restore order, but the gavel's faint echo was swallowed by the roar of clashing voices. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the moment, and both speakers knew the cameras were devouring every second. Jill straightened, pulling the microphone a little closer. Her voice carried the weight of controlled fire. "Senator Kennedy, you stand there with your rehearsed lines about burden and honesty, but let's be clear, your rhetoric isn't about lifting people up. It's about sowing division. That's not leadership, that's opportunism. She let the word opportunism hang in the air like smoke after a gunshot. A section of the audience erupted in cheers, their claps sharp and defiant. Kennedy didn't flinch. He leaned back, his hand tapping the table rhythmically as if counting down before delivering the blow. Ma'am, if pointing out the failures of leadership is division, then maybe unity has been redefined to mean silence. And I'm not here to be silent. I'm here to speak for folks who don't get invited to these polished events, who don't sit on panels, who can't afford lobbyists to carry their message. Those are the people I answer to, not the political class that claps for pretty speeches. The crowd roared again, this time, louder than before. A chant broke out in the back rows, swelling like a wave. Kennedy paused to let it ride, a showman's instinct fused with a trial lawyer's patience. Jill, unwilling to lose ground, raised her palm to quiet her own supporters, then fixed her gaze on him with surgical precision. You talk about the people, Senator. But real leadership means telling them hard truths, not just what makes them clap. Yes, times are difficult. Yes, the country feels divided. But when you pour fuel on fear, when you mock attempts at unity, you don't solve problems, you deepen wounds. Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his tone shifting lower, almost conspiratorial. And when you keep pretending everything is fine, when you tell folks to just hold on while their lives crumble, you're not healing wounds, you're ignoring them. And people know the difference, ma'am. They can smell spin before the words even leave a politician's lips. A tense silence followed, heavier than the shouting before. It was as though both had dragged the nation's raw nerve into the open, and now the entire hall was holding its breath to see which voice history would remember louder. The silence didn't last long. It fractured under the pressure of murmurs, whispers, and then a sudden eruption of clapping that rolled like thunder across the hall. Half the audience leaned toward Jill Biden, admiring her composure. The other half leaned toward Kennedy, electrified by his raw defiance. It was no longer a polite debate, it was a duel, and both contenders understood that this moment would echo far beyond the stage. Jill steadied herself, her posture regal, her voice sharpened like a blade. Senator, you accuse me of pretending everything is fine, but let's be honest, you thrive on exaggeration. You weaponize hardship, paint America as a failing nation, because it gives you power. That's not courage, that's performance. People need solutions, not sound bites. She raised her chin slightly, her tone rising in confidence. America doesn't move forward when its leaders dwell in despair. It moves forward when leaders inspire hope. The applause from her side surged. For a moment, she seemed to regain the upper hand. But Kennedy was a man built for these collisions, and he let her finish without interruption. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he leaned into the microphone, his southern drawl carrying a weight that silenced even his loudest critics. Ma'am, hope is a beautiful thing. But hope without honesty is nothing more than a bedtime story you tell kids so they'll sleep through the storm. Folks aren't children. They know when their wallets are empty. They know when their streets aren't safe. They know when the people in charge are living in a different America than they are. And no matter how many speeches you give about moving forward, they're stuck standing still. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few voices shouted in protest, but many others erupted in chants, Kennedy's name rising above the noise. Jill didn't flinch, her smile was tight, her grip firm on the podium. She let the noise swirl, then struck back with precision. And yet, Senator, here you are, standing on this stage, benefiting from the very system you claim is broken. You criticize, but you don't fix. You mock leaders, but you don't lead. Leadership is not about burning down the house to prove there's a fire. It's about putting it out. The hall went wild, cheers clashing with boos, the atmosphere on the edge of chaos. Kennedy raised one hand, motioning for calm, then delivered the line that would make headlines. Lady, if the house is burning, the first job is to admit it's on fire. Only then can you put it out. Pretending the smoke is just a little fog doesn't save anybody, it kills them. And the people out there, they're tired of choking on fog that comes from Washington. The chamber erupted again, but this time, it wasn't divided. It was explosive, because both sides knew they had just witnessed a turning point. The energy in the chamber felt like a storm rolling over open fields, each exchange striking harder than the last, each word sparking louder echoes across the country. AOC wasn't done yet. She steadied her hands on the lectern, her eyes narrowing as she leaned into the microphone. Her voice softened, but only to sharpen the emotional edge. Senator Kennedy, you keep painting me as some kind of out-of-touch radical, but let's be honest, I'm speaking for people who don't have a voice in this chamber. For the families choosing between insulin and groceries. For the kids growing up in neighborhoods poisoned by pollution. You say they don't want slogans? Maybe, but they don't want politicians who keep kicking the can down the road while their futures disappear. The gallery clapped again, this time slower, more measured, almost sympathetic. AOC gestured toward the press gallery. You love to mock hashtags, but hashtags are the voices of people who've been ignored for generations. And when you dismiss them, you're dismissing the lived experience of millions. Her delivery was forceful, but Kennedy didn't look rattled. He adjusted his tie, shifted his stance, and stepped closer to the microphone, his eyes locking on hers with the calm of a man who'd been in this arena too many times to be fazed. Congresswoman, he began, his drawl rolling slow, deliberate, I don't doubt those struggles are real. I've seen them too, but here's the difference, you use them as leverage. I treat them as sacred obligations. The words cut, not because they were loud, but because they carried weight. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice rising just enough to fill the chamber. You talk about kids and insulin and groceries, and Lord knows I care about them. But you want to slap a shiny label on a trillion-dollar scheme and pretend the math doesn't matter. That's not leadership, it's malpractice. He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was dead quiet now. You call hashtags voices. I call them shortcuts. Real leadership means rolling up your sleeves, hammering out real policy, fighting for reforms that actually pass and put food on tables. You can get applause for rhetoric, Congresswoman, but applause doesn't pay a light bill. The chamber broke into thunderous applause on Kennedy's side. Even some who'd clapped for AOC earlier found themselves nodding at the blunt, undeniable truth of his retort. Cameras zoomed in on Kennedy's steady expression, then back to AOC's tightening jaw. The battle had shifted again. What AOC tried to frame as emotional truth, Kennedy had reframed as political theater. And the crowd knew it. By now, the chamber felt less like a policy debate and more like a prize fight. Every sentence was a blow, every pause a chance for the other to strike. AOC, refusing to cede ground, shifted her tone again, this time, aiming straight for the heartstrings. She steadied her breath and spoke with a deliberate tremor in her voice, calculated to reach beyond the chamber walls and into living rooms across America. Senator Kennedy, you talk about math and bills like it's just numbers on a page. But behind those numbers are people. People with names, faces, dreams. Every time you dismiss my proposals as fantasy, you're telling those families that their lives, their struggles, aren't worth solving. Do you know what it feels like to sit with a mother who lost her son because he couldn't afford medicine? To tell her the system just needs incremental reforms while her boy is gone forever? That's not leadership, Senator. That's cruelty wrapped in clever words. Her allies clapped loudly, their applause echoing like thunder, drowning out murmurs from Kennedy's side. AOC raised her chin, voice growing stronger. History will not remember your jokes or your southern wit. It will remember who stood on the side of justice when people cried out for help. And right now, Senator, you're on the wrong side of history. The air thickened. Even Kennedy's allies leaned forward, waiting, knowing he had to answer carefully. The cameras captured every detail, AOC's fiery glare, the tension carved into the room, the palpable silence as Kennedy slowly rose once more. He didn't rush. He didn't bark back. Instead, his voice came low, steady, like a slow drawl of thunder before a storm. Congresswoman, I've met those mothers. I've held their hands when they told me about losing their children. Don't you dare stand here and pretend you care more about their grief than I do. The difference is, I don't exploit their pain to sell a political brand. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Kennedy's tone sharpened. You want history to remember you? It will. But not the way you think. It will remember a politician who promised the moon and delivered dust. Who cloaked herself in emotion while ignoring the hard truths of governing. Justice isn't shouting the loudest in a chamber, it's doing the work that actually helps people, even if it doesn't get you trending on Twitter. The applause exploded from Kennedy's side, shaking the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously, already shaping headlines. Kennedy to AOC, don't exploit grief to sell a brand. AOC's jaw tightened, but the confidence in her eyes flickered. For the first time, she looked less like the insurgent firebrand and more like a politician caught under the weight of her own theatrics. The chamber's air grew tighter, the tension now a living thing that wrapped around every word. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the confrontation had moved beyond scripted talking points. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, and when he spoke again, his voice had the quiet weight of lived experience. Congresswoman, he began, you want to make this a contest of compassion. Let me tell you something, compassion without responsibility is just theater. His words hung in the air, steady and deliberate. He shifted slightly, his gaze sweeping across the chamber before locking back on AOC. I've walked through floodwaters in Louisiana, seen families who lost everything. I've sat with farmers staring at ruined crops, teachers trying to buy supplies out of their own pockets. I didn't hashtag those moments, I rolled up my sleeves. Because leadership isn't about performance. It's about presence. AOC's lips tightened, her hand resting on the edge of the lectern as if to steady herself. Kennedy pressed on, his tone sharpening. You call your slogans the voices of the people. But real people don't need slogans, they need solutions. They don't need lectures about justice, they need safe neighborhoods, jobs that pay, and schools that teach. And until you can explain how your proposals deliver those things without bankrupting the country, you're selling hope on credit. A ripple of applause cut through the chamber, louder than before, echoing through the marble walls. Even some of AOC's usual allies shifted uneasily, glancing down at their notes. Kennedy straightened, his drawl carrying a final sting. Congresswoman, your passion is loud. But passion without results is just noise. And the American people have heard enough noise. The chamber erupted, Kennedy's side thundering with applause, while AOC supporters tried to regroup. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment. Kennedy standing tall, unflinching, his words still reverberating like aftershocks. AOC, sensing the ground slipping beneath her, gripped the lectern with both hands. Her voice rose, tinged with frustration, as if sheer volume could overpower Kennedy's steady blows. Senator Kennedy, what you call a noise, is the sound of people demanding justice. You reduce this to math and numbers, but you ignore the moral obligation we have to act boldly. Incremental change doesn't save lives, it delays justice. And history doesn't remember those who played it safe. It remembers those who dared to push boundaries. The crowd in the gallery erupted, some clapping furiously, others shouting encouragement. Cameras pivoted toward her, hungry for the dramatic moment. She raised her finger toward Kennedy, her words sharp and accusatory. You call yourself a man of the people, but all I see is a politician hiding behind caution and spreadsheets, afraid to risk anything real for the people who need it most. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Kennedy leaned forward, his gaze unblinking, his drawl sharpened to a blade. Congresswoman, history also remembers those who promised everything and delivered nothing. It remembers leaders who sold hope they couldn't pay for, leaving working families with the bill. You say boldness matters more than math. But when the math fails, it's those same families, those single mothers, those children you talk about, who get crushed under the weight of broken promises. He paused, his words settling like stone. Justice isn't gambling with people's futures. Justice is delivering results they can trust. And you can't buy groceries with hashtags or pay a hospital bill with rhetoric. That's the reality. The chamber erupted, this time almost entirely in Kennedy's favor. The thunder of applause rolled across the floor, drowning out scattered boos. Reporters typed furiously, some shaking their heads, others nodding, recognizing they just witnessed a pivotal moment. AOC's fire flickered, she tried to respond, but the roar of the crowd silenced her. Kennedy, calm and unmoved, folded his notes and stood tall, the chamber now hanging on his every move. The chamber had reached a fever pitch. The echoes of applause still reverberated when Kennedy, steady as a stone, lifted his gaze and spoke with a quiet authority that cut sharper than any shout. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The silence that fell over the room gave every syllable weight. "Congresswoman," he began, his southern drawl deliberate, "you can call me cautious, outdated, even cruel if you'd like. But I'll tell you what I will never be, I will never be careless with the lives of the people who sent me here. They don't need promises spun from wishful thinking. They need leaders who tell them the truth, even when it's hard to hear." AOC shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tight, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for allies to rally. But the chamber was transfixed, locked on Kennedy. He leaned forward slightly, delivering his final blow. "You speak of justice, but real justice means standing in the storm with your people, not selling them a rainbow that disappears when the cameras leave. Justice means being honest about the costs, the sacrifices, and the reality of what government can and cannot do. Hope without truth isn't leadership, it's betrayal." The chamber erupted once more, this time a sustained thunder of applause that rolled through the hall. Even those who opposed Kennedy found themselves nodding, unwillingly caught by the gravity of his words. The camera zoomed in, capturing Kennedy's calm but unwavering expression, no smugness, no theatrics, just the unshakable presence of a man who had spoken his piece and stood by it. AOC's papers lay untouched, her attempt at a rebuttal caught in her throat. For once, her trademark fire dimmed under the weight of Kennedy's steady truth. The crowd in the gallery leaned back, murmurs spreading. This wasn't just a debate. This was a moment. Kennedy sat down slowly, folding his hands, the chamber still buzzing. And as the gavel struck, the story was already writing itself, headlines, soundbites, and viral clips of a senator who stood his ground and left his opponent in silence. Folks, what we witnessed today proves one thing: empty slogans and fake promises don't fix America. This country needs honesty, grit, and real leadership, not showmanship. I've never been afraid to tell the truth, and I won't start now. America doesn't rise on lies, it rises on courage and conviction. And I promise you, we're not backing down.